Hollywood lied to you about tank warfare. Those dramatic duels between Shermans and Tigers, Panzers trading shots across open fields, heroic gunners deciding battles with perfect aim. They accounted for less than 30% of German tank losses in World War II. Less than 30%. The real tank killers of the Wehrmacht were far more mundane, far more shocking, and far more devastating than anything you've seen on screen. Let's shatter the biggest myth right now. The majority of German tanks weren't destroyed in glorious combat. They were abandoned on muddy roads, scuttled in retreats, broken down and stripped for parts, victims of something deadlier than any enemy shell could ever be: logistics. By 1944, Allied interrogators sat across from a captured German maintenance officer, exhausted, defeated, and brutally honest. His words were recorded in official reports, declassified decades later. "For every Panzer we lose to enemy action," he said, "we lose 3 to mechanical failure and fuel shortage. 3 to 1. This wasn't propaganda. This wasn't an exaggeration. This was mathematics written in broken gearboxes and empty fuel tanks across 2 continents. Consider the legendary Tiger tank, engineering masterpiece. 88mm gun that could punch through any Allied armor at 2 kilometers. Frontal armor so thick it made crews feel invincible. But that Tiger had a fatal flaw nobody talks about. The final drive system needed complete replacement every 500 kilometers. 500. That's the distance from Paris to the German border. Under ideal conditions, in Russian mud or North African sand, try 200 kilometers before something critical snapped. The Panther tank was even worse. Each one required exactly 200 different types of ball bearings. 200 precision components that had to be manufactured, shipped, and installed perfectly. When the Allies bombed Schweinfurt's ball-bearing plants in August and October of 1943, Panthers started breaking down before they ever reached the front lines. One Wehrmacht mechanic wrote home in desperation. His letter survived the war, found in archives 70 years later. "We have beautiful tanks that can destroy anything, magnificent machines, but they sit here useless, motionless, because we are missing a 10 Pfennig gasket. 10 Pfennigs, about 3 cents in American money. That's what stopped a 300,000 Reichsmark war machine." But here's where it gets interesting. The second biggest killer of German tanks wasn't superior Allied armor. It wasn't brave tank destroyers or skilled gunners. It was something far simpler, far cheaper, and absolutely everywhere. Germany lost the war at the fuel pump before a single shot was fired. The numbers tell a story that no amount of tactical brilliance could overcome. Germany's synthetic fuel production peaked at 124,000 barrels per day in 1944. Impressive engineering, cutting-edge chemistry, a triumph of German industrial science. The Allies produced 7 million barrels per day. 7 million versus 124,000. Do that math. For every liter of fuel Germany squeezed from coal, the Allies pumped 56 liters straight from the ground. Natural petroleum versus synthetic desperation. Now add this. A single Tiger tank consumed 500 liters of fuel for every 100 kilometers traveled. The Eastern Front, at its maximum extent, stretched 2,900 kilometers from the Baltic to the Black Sea. You see the problem. Germany built tanks that drank fuel faster than the Reich could produce it. They created a magnificent army that was always, mathematically, inevitably going to run dry. June 1944. Operation Bagration, the Soviet summer offensive that shattered Army Group Center. German panzer divisions didn't lose because Soviet tanks outfought them. They lost because their fuel trucks never arrived, bombed on the roads, ambushed by partisans, rerouted to other desperate sectors. Wehrmacht logistics officers wrote the same phrase in their reports, over and over, hundreds of times. Destroyed by own crew. Reason: no fuel. Perfect tanks, fully armed, experienced crews, abandoned because there was nothing in the tank. One Panzer commander described watching his men place demolition charges inside their own vehicles. healthy machines that had survived dozens of battles. "We're destroying more tanks today than the Russians destroyed all week," he wrote in his diary. "Not because we're beaten, because we cannot move." But fuel was only half the nightmare. The Schweinfurt raids changed everything. August 17th and October 14th, 1943, American B-17 bombers hit the ball-bearing manufacturing plants. The raid cost the 8th Air Force 60 bombers and hundreds of airmen. But it worked. Ball-bearing production dropped 43%. 43% of those tiny, precision components that made everything turn, rotate, and function. Tank transmissions, tank turret rings, tank road wheels. Every rotating component needed ball bearings, and suddenly Germany couldn't make enough. Factories had 95% of the parts to complete a tank. 95%, everything except the bearings. And a tank that's 95% complete is a pile of useless steel. Panthers sat in factory yards, complete except for transmission bearings. Tigers waited for turret ring assemblies that never came. Tank crews arrived for their new vehicles and found them immobile, incomplete, worthless. One factory manager sent a desperate report to Berlin. The language was bureaucratic, but the panic bled through every line. "We have capacity to produce 150 tanks this month. We have steel, armor plate, guns, optics, engines. We will complete 11 tanks. 11. We are missing Model B7321 bearings." By April 1945, the nightmare reached its conclusion. Wehrmacht destruction logs from the final weeks contain hundreds of identical entries. Destroyed by crew. The reason column lists the same words again and again. Kein Treibstoff. No fuel. Keine Ersatzteil. No spare parts. One officer's diary, dated April 28, 1945, captures the agony perfectly. "We destroyed 6 tanks today. Perfect machines. Not a single enemy shell touched them. We had no fuel to move them and no desire to leave them for the Russians." This is how Germany dies. Not in battle, but in a fuel depot somewhere in Romania that was bombed 3 months ago. Here's a question nobody asks. What's the most cost-effective weapon ever deployed in warfare? A Soviet TM-41 anti-tank mine costs $3 to manufacture. Stamped metal casing. 10 pounds of explosive. A pressure fuse that cost less than the screws holding it together. $3. A German Tiger. 2 tank cost 300,000 Reichsmarks. In contemporary value, roughly 800,000 American dollars. Precision optics. Krupp steel armor. An 88mm gun that represented thousands of engineering hours. $3 versus $800,000. The Soviets laid 200 million mines during the war. 200 million. The Germans laid 15 million on the Eastern Front alone. The British at El Alamein planted over 500,000 mines in a single defensive line. And here's the beautiful simplicity of mine warfare. The mine didn't need to destroy the tank. It just needed to blow off the track. A 60-ton Tiger with a broken track in the Russian Rasputitsa, the spring mud season, became exactly what it looked like. A 60-ton paperweight. Recovery vehicles couldn't reach it. The mud was too deep. The roads were too soft. Repair crews couldn't get the parts forward, so the crew abandoned it, planted a demolition charge, walked away. Another perfect tank lost to $3 worth of stamped steel and TNT. American after-action reports from Normandy tell a story that shatters every Hollywood tank battle you've ever seen. Mines and improvised explosives destroyed more German armor than bazookas, anti-tank guns, and tank guns combined. At Kursk, the largest tank battle in history, German casualty reports document 23% of attacking armor damaged or destroyed by mines in the first 48 hours, nearly a quarter of the force, before they ever saw an enemy tank. One German tank commander kept a diary. His unit fought across Ukraine in 1943. The entry from July 7th is 3 sentences long. Lost 2 Panthers today. Mines. We scan the horizon for enemy tanks while death waits invisibly beneath our tracks. That last line captures something Hollywood never shows. Tank crews feared what they couldn't see more than what they could fight. You could train for a tank duel. You could practice gunnery. You could learn weak points and firing angles and tactics. But a mine? A mine was random chance and mechanical physics. Your track rolls over the wrong square meter of earth, and suddenly you're walking home. The economics were obscene. Soviet factories stamped out TM-41 mines by the thousands per day. Simple assembly. Unskilled labor. Materials that cost less than a soldier's daily ration. German factories struggled to produce 20 Tigers per month. Skilled craftsmen. Precision machining. Materials shipped from across occupied Europe. Mass production defeated precision engineering. $3 defeated 800,000. And the math was always, inevitably, going to favor the mine. Now, let's talk about the weapon that actually killed the most German tanks in combat. And it's not what anyone expects. It wasn't anti-tank guns. It wasn't tank destroyers. It wasn't even other tanks. It was artillery. Regular artillery. High-explosive shells designed to kill infantry. The Soviets perfected this at Kursk with their pack front tactic. Pack front. Wall of guns. When German tanks were spotted, Soviet forward observers called in coordinates. Then hundreds of artillery pieces simply obliterated that entire grid square. A 152mm howitzer shell didn't need a direct hit on a tank. Physics did the work. A shell landing within 10 meters would flip a medium Panzer through concussive force alone. Within 5 meters, the blast collapsed internal components. Killed crews through concussion. Ruptured fuel tanks. Detonated ammunition. Here's the statistic that changes everything. At Kursk, Soviet artillery destroyed more German tanks in the first 3 hours of defensive bombardment than Soviet tanks destroyed in 3 days of mobile combat. 3 hours versus 3 days. The ratio was 3-to-1, artillery to tank versus tank kills. The Soviets treated tanks like they treated infantry. If you know where they are, you don't duel them. You erase the map coordinates where they exist. But the Americans took artillery tank killing to another level entirely. They had a secret weapon that made German tank crews more terrified of American guns than anything else on the battlefield. The VT proximity fuse, developed in 1942, deployed widely by 1944, a radio fuse that made shells explode in airburst above the target. No impact necessary. The shell sensed proximity and detonated 30 meters above the ground. Shrapnel rained straight down onto the thinnest armor on any tank. The top, German tanks, had 80 to 120 millimeters of frontal armor, 25 millimeters on top, sometimes less. Proximity fuses turned every artillery shell into 1,000 pieces of hot metal falling from the sky onto armor thin as a car door. Normandy casualty statistics document 60% of German tank commanders were killed or wounded by artillery. 60%. These were men whose heads and shoulders were exposed in open hatches. Men who needed to see the battlefield to command their vehicles. Airbursting shells decapitated them, shredded them, killed them without ever touching the tank itself. Crews found their commanders dead in the cupola, the rest of the tank untouched. One Panzer veteran, interviewed decades after the war, said it plainly. We feared American artillery more than anything, more than their tanks, more than their aircraft. You couldn't fight it. You couldn't see it. You couldn't escape it. It just came. From 20 kilometers away. And there was nothing you could do. Artillery didn't just destroy tanks. It paralyzed armor operations. German units learned to bunch up under tree cover. Refused to move in open ground. Became predictable. Static. And static tanks are dead tanks. The Soviets would identify the tree line where German armor was hiding, then they'd saturate it. 800 guns firing into 4 square kilometers. Nothing survived. Not even the trees. The Soviet PTRD 4-1 anti-tank rifle couldn't penetrate a Tiger's frontal armor. Not even close. 14.5 mm round versus 100 mm of face-hardened Krupp steel. The math didn't work. Soviet infantry discovered something better. You don't need to penetrate the armor. You just need to blind the tank. Fire 20 rounds at the vision ports, at the periscopes, at the optics, at every piece of glass that lets the crew see outside their steel coffin. 14.5 mm rounds won't punch through armor plate, but they'll shatter every viewport on the tank. A blind tank is a useless tank. Blind tanks stumbled into ravines, crashed into buildings, drove off bridges, buttoned up completely, and became sitting targets for everything else. Tanks need to see to fight. Without vision, they're just expensive bunkers that can't shoot back effectively. The Soviet Union produced 471,000 PTRD and PTRS anti-tank rifles. 471,000. Each one cost 193 rubles to manufacture, about $35 $35 to neutralize an $800,000 tank. The asymmetric warfare economics were beautiful in their simplicity. Then came the bazooka evolution. The M1 bazooka in 1942 was marginally effective, barely scratched German armor. The M9 in 1943 had improved penetration, started causing real problems. By 1945, the M20 Super Bazooka could penetrate most German armor from the side or rear. But the weapon didn't matter as much as the tactics. Infantry learned to fight tanks in cities. Close range, ambush positions, upper floors of buildings, shoot down onto thin top armor or into engine grills. Tank doctrine required open ground, mobility, maneuver space. Cities negated every advantage tanks possessed, turned them into slow, blind targets in concrete canyons where infantry owned every window and doorway. And here's the final irony. The Panzerfaust, Germany's own disposable anti-tank weapon. Cheap, simple, devastating, at close range. By 1945, more Panzerfausts were in Allied hands than German hands, captured by the tens of thousands, used against the tanks they were designed to protect. Training time tells the whole story. Training a soldier to use a bazooka or Panzerfaust, 2 weeks. Training a tank crew, 6 months minimum. By 1945, sometimes just 6 weeks for German crews. Production time? A bazooka took days to manufacture. A tank took months. The mathematics of modern warfare favored simplicity, favored mass production, favored weapons that could be handed to any soldier and used effectively within days. Engineering excellence became a liability when you couldn't produce it fast enough or train people to use it properly. By D-Day, June 6, 1944, the Allies had 14,000 aircraft operational over France. 14,000. The Luftwaffe had 300 operational fighters in the entire theater. 14,000 versus 300, a ratio of 47 to 1. The sky belonged to the Allies. Completely. Absolutely. And that changed everything about how tanks could operate. The British developed something called the cab rank system, fighter bombers circling constantly over the battlefield, like taxis waiting for a fare. Forward air controllers on the ground would radio coordinates. Average response time? 15 to 20 minutes. 15 minutes from "we see German tanks" to "rockets and bombs are falling on them." German armor was restricted to nighttime movement by mid-1944. Daylight movement meant immediate air attack. Columns had to hide under tree cover during the day, move only after sunset, hope they reached their destination before dawn. Here's what's fascinating. British Typhoon rockets had a terrible direct hit rate on tanks, 4 to 5%. 95 times out of 100 the rocket missed. But direct kills weren't the point. The psychological effect was paralyzing. The operational impact was devastating. German units bunched up, refused to move, became predictable and static. And we've already established what happens to static tanks. The German 116th Panzer Division tried to move 150 kilometers to reinforce Normandy. 150 kilometers. They lost 50% of their armor before arriving, not from combat, from air attacks and mechanical breakdowns caused by rushing to avoid aircraft. Tanks that couldn't move became artillery targets, and artillery, as we've established, was the real killer. This was the killing chain. Air dominance led to movement restriction. Movement restriction led to predictable positions. Predictable positions led to artillery concentration. Artillery concentration led to destruction. The Falaise Pocket in August 1944 demonstrates this perfectly. 344 German tanks and assault guns destroyed or abandoned in 1 week. Not from tank battles, from combined aerial bombardment and artillery strikes on units that couldn't maneuver because Allied aircraft owned the sky. German armor doctrine was built on mobility, blitzkrieg, rapid movement, exploitation of breakthroughs, maneuver warfare. Everything that made German tanks effective required the ability to move freely. Air superiority removed that ability entirely. Without mobility, a tank became a bunker, and bunkers don't win wars. Bunkers sit in one place and wait to be destroyed by artillery, or bombed from above, or bypassed completely. One German tank commander described the feeling simply. Every time we moved, we felt eyes from the sky. Every road march was a prayer that we'd reach cover before the fighter bombers found us. We spent more time hiding from aircraft than fighting enemy tanks. Air attack directly destroyed 5 to 10% of German tanks, but the operational impact? Incalculable. It froze German armor, made every movement a calculated risk, turned the hunter into the hunted. The sky didn't just kill tanks, it paralyzed them. And paralyzed tanks died to everything else. Let's talk about the numbers that made everything else inevitable. Germany produced 49,777 tanks and assault guns during the entire war. 49,000. Every factory running. Every shift working. Maximum production from 1939 to 1945. The Soviet Union produced 105,251 tanks and self-propelled guns. The United States produced 88,410 tanks. The United Kingdom produced 27,896 tanks. Combined Allied production? 221,557 armored vehicles versus Germany's 49,777. The ratio was 4.45 to 1. For every German tank rolling off the production line, the Allies built 4.5. For Germany to achieve parity through combat effectiveness alone, their tanks would need to destroy Allied tanks at a 4.5 to 1 ratio. Consistently. For 6 years, they didn't. Eastern Front kill ratios started at about 1.5 to 1 in Germany's favor in 1941. By 1944, it approached 1 to 1. Western Front ratios hovered around 1.3 to 1 German favor. But here's what shatters the entire narrative. Tanks weren't killing tanks at these ratios. Everything else was doing the killing. The mines, the artillery, the mechanical failures, the fuel shortages, the air attacks. Tank versus tank combat was almost irrelevant to the final outcome. Even crew quality couldn't save them. German tank crew training time tells the story of collapse. 1942, 6 months of comprehensive training. 1943, 3 months. 1944, 6 weeks of abbreviated emergency training. 1945, sometimes as little as 2 weeks. You can put skilled crews in excellent tanks, but it means nothing when there's no fuel in the tank, no spare parts in the depot, no air cover overhead, no hope of reinforcement. Excellence made irrelevant by context. The final truth is the darkest. April and May of 1945. Wehrmacht destruction logs from the last weeks. 40 to 60% of abandoned German armor was destroyed by its own crews. The reason column lists the same words over and over and over. Kein Treibstoff, no fuel. Keine Munition, No ammunition. Keine Ersatzteil. No spare parts. A Panzer officer's diary from April 28, 1945. His unit is retreating west, trying to reach American lines instead of Soviet. We destroyed 6 tanks today. Perfect machines. Not one enemy shell touched them. We had no fuel to move them, no desire to leave them for the Russians. This is how Germany dies, not in glorious battle, but in a fuel depot somewhere in Romania that was bombed 3 months ago. German tanks weren't defeated by better Allied tanks. They were defeated by industrial capacity, by oil production, by artillery shells, by $3 mines, by air superiority, by mechanical over-engineering, by mathematics. Germany built magnificent tanks that could win any duel. But modern war isn't a duel. It's a factory floor, and the Allies turned theirs into the world's most efficient tank-killing machine.